Wyoming Territory, 1879. The wind cut sharp through the high plains when Callum Tate rode into the burned-out skeleton of what used to be a homestead. Charred wood. A broken wagon will half-buried in dirt, and silence so heavy it pressed against his skin. He dismounted slow, eyes scanning for life. He had been trailing the smoke for a day and a half, riding hard from the Sweetwater River after spotting it from the ridge. He had seen too many of these settlements raided, homes gone to ruin, families vanished. But there was someone here. He heard it now, a soft rasp of breathing, just behind the collapsed barn wall. Callum stepped careful, hand resting light on the butt of his Colt. He rounded the beam and stopped. She was crouched low, arms wrapped around two small children, both with soot on their cheeks and eyes too wide for their age. The woman's dress was torn at the sleeve, her lips split, but she held her chin steady. She looked straight at him. No fear, no trembling, just tired, angry eyes. "You hurt?" he asked, voice quiet. She didn't answer. Instead, she slowly shifted the girl on her lap, setting her down on the dirt. The boy clung tight to her skirt. "I will not let you take them," she said. Callum raised both hands, his voice calmer now. "I am not here to take anything." She narrowed her eyes, then let out a breath. "Then who are you?" "Name's Callum Tate. I was trailing the smoke. Thought someone might need help." The girl coughed. The boy began to cry. "I am Geneva Jennings," the woman said. "These are my brother's children, Griffin and Grace. He's gone. They all are." Callum's jaw tightened. He looked toward the house, barely more than black beams and ash now. "Raiders." She nodded once. 2 days ago, I hid with the children. They didn't find us." Callum crouched beside her. "You got anyone nearby?" "No one left." Her voice cracked. "I have nowhere to go." She swayed slightly, and he caught her by the arm before she could fall. She flinched when his hand touched hers, but then she stilled. She looked at his hand, rough and scarred from years of cattle rope and gunmetal. No one ever touched him without flinching, but she did not let go. Instead, her fingers closed around his, and for the first time in years, he felt the warmth of someone holding his hand without fear. Callum held her steady, eyes on hers. "You can ride with me. I will get you and the children safe." Geneva looked at the children, then back at him. "Why would you help us?" He hesitated. "Because you need help, and I reckon I have gone too long with nothing good to show for all my years." She did not smile, but she gave a small nod. They rode out that evening, Geneva and the children in the back of Callum's buckboard wagon, while he led the way on horseback. They had salvaged what little they could: blankets, 2 sacks of beans, a cracked locket Geneva wore around her neck. The first night, they camped beneath a shelf of pine. Callum built the fire while Geneva boiled water, her hands steady now that the children were asleep curled together under one quilt. She sat across from him in the flicker of firelight, her face streaked with dirt but her jaw held strong. "I was not supposed to raise them," she said after a long silence. "I came west to live with my brother, help him with the land. Then the land burned, and he is gone, and now they are mine." Callum watched her. "You are doing better than most would." She glanced down at her hands. "You do not know what I am doing. I know enough. I know you kept them alive." She looked up, eyes softening. "And you? Why are you out here alone?" Callum poked at the fire with a stick. "I used to run cattle down in Colorado. Then I put my hand where it did not belong during a barn fire. Lost 3 fingers." He held up his left hand. The middle, ring, and pinky were gone at the knuckle. Geneva's gaze stayed on his hand, but she did not look away. "They called me cursed after that," he continued. "Said I brought bad luck. So I left." She reached out slowly. No hesitation. just reached across the firelight and touched the side of his hand with hers. Not pity, not shock, just quiet understanding. "You are not cursed," she said. Callum could not speak for a moment. No one had touched that hand since the fire. Not once. He looked at her, really looked at her now. The way the fire caught the copper of her eyes. The strength in her spine despite all she had lost. She was not just surviving. She was standing, holding up 2 children and the weight of grief without falling. And she had touched his hand like it was not broken. They traveled for 5 days, heading toward the small town of Red Rock near the Laramie foothills. Callum knew a rancher there who owed him a favor, a man with enough land to offer shelter, maybe even work. Each day Geneva grew steadier. She laughed once, just a flicker, when Griffin tried to ride the mule and ended up in a pile of snow. That laugh stayed with Callum all day. Each night, they shared coffee by the fire while the children slept. She asked about his life before the fire. He asked about hers in Ohio before she came west. The bond between them grew without needing explanation. He started handing her down from the wagon with both hands. She started brushing the dust from his coat without asking. He found himself watching her more than the trail. By the 6th day, when the town lights of Red Rock glowed in the distance, Callum stopped his horse and turned in the saddle. "I can leave you with the rancher. You will be safe there. He is a good man." Geneva looked up at him from the wagon seat. "And what will you do?" "I will keep riding. I always do." She climbed down, walked to him, stood close. "You do not have to," she said. "Not this time." Callum looked down at his hand, then at her. "You are the first person to ever touch me without fear. And I do not want anyone else beside me now." Geneva reached up. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw. "Then stay." He stepped down from the horse, took her hand in his, strong and sure. "I will." She smiled, then real bright, and he knew, deep down, that nothing in his life had ever felt more right. They walked into Red Rock together, hand in hand, the children asleep in the wagon behind them. And for the first time in a long while, Callum Tate felt like he was riding toward something worth keeping. The wind stirred dust through the narrow main street of Red Rock as Callum tied off his horse outside the livery. Geneva stood beside the wagon, her hand resting on Grace's back, where the girl slept curled beneath a canvas sheet. Griffin stirred but didn't wake. "Stable's just down the way," Callum said, keeping his voice low. "I'll see to the mule and the horse, then we'll get you inside." Geneva nodded, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Where will we sleep?" "There's a bunkhouse on the edge of town. My friend Eli keeps it for his hands. You'll have a roof and heat." "And you?" she asked. "I'll be close." "I always am." Geneva looked at him for a long moment, then turned back to the children without a word. He watched her shoulders settle, less guarded now, but still carrying weight. The bunkhouse sat past the corral, its walls hewn from thick pine and patched in places with rawhide where weather had worn through. Eli met them at the door, his beard now more gray than fair, eyes creased deep from sun and smoke. He didn't ask questions, just looked at Geneva, then the children, and stepped aside. Callum carried Grace inside, her small arms looped around his neck, and set her gently on the cot closest to the stove. Griffin followed, yawning as he tugged at Geneva's skirt. Eli leaned close once they were settled. "They yours?" "No," Callum said, "but they're hers. And now she's mine." Eli gave a slow nod. "Then they're yours too." That night, the wind howled like a wounded animal across the plains. Inside, the bunkhouse smelled of coal smoke and dry wool. Geneva didn't sleep quickly. She sat by the stove, her knees drawn to her chest, watching the flame through the iron grate. Callum set a chair beside her, close but not touching. "I've never owed anyone," she said, gaze fixed on the fire. "Not until now." You don't owe me. I do, she whispered. For more than I can name. He didn't answer, just reached forward, took a coal poker, and shifted the embers until they glowed steady orange again. In the morning, Geneva stood at the washbasin out back, scrubbing the children's clothes with a bar of lye soap worn thin at the edges. Callum approached with a tin cup of coffee and a folded piece of paper. Eli says there's a teacher in town looking for help. Widow owns a little schoolhouse south of the church. You'd be good at it. She wrung out a sock and laid it across the fence rail. I've never taught. You read. You speak plain. You care. He handed her the paper. She's looking for someone steady. Geneva took the notice in both hands, eyes skimming its lines. I can't leave the children. They'll be with me, Callum said. I'll take them riding, help Eli mend fences. They'll be safe. She looked up at him. You'd do that. I already am. She stared at him, then really stared, like she was trying to see beneath the dust and leather and silence. Then she gave a slow nod. I'll go speak to her. Geneva met the widow that afternoon. By evening, she returned with ink on her fingertips and a slate tucked under one arm. She said I can start tomorrow, she told Callum as she stirred oats into boiling water. Said I have a good voice for children. Callum grinned. You do. That night, Griffin clambered onto Callum's lap without asking. A wooden spoon in one hand and a wild story about a fox he'd seen in the brush. Grace curled beside Geneva, her head resting on her aunt's thigh. You sure you want to stay here? Callum asked once the children had drifted off again. Geneva looked around the room, at the cot, the stove, the small pile of belongings by the door. I want to build something, she said. Not just keep running. Then I'll be here, he said. Every step. She stood and walked to him, her face unreadable. Then she knelt beside his chair and took his hand, the ruined one, and pressed it between both of hers. I don't care what they say about bad luck, she whispered. You brought us through fire. He brought his forehead to hers, their breath mingling in the hush of the room. You're the only thing I've wanted in years, he said. And I don't aim to lose you. She didn't pull away, didn't flinch, just held his hand tighter, as if daring the world to try and take him from her. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. Their hands stayed joined long after the fire burned low, and when the last ember faded, they were still there together, steady, unshaken. The air smelled of chalk and coal oil when Geneva stepped into the schoolhouse. Morning sun filtered through warped window glass, catching dust in long beams. A row of benches lined the room, most too high for the younger children, the edges worn smooth by restless hands. The widow, Mrs. Branning, handed Geneva a slate and a folded sheaf of readers, then nodded toward the front desk. They've never had a second teacher, she said, smoothing her apron. You'll find their tempers better after the first bell. Geneva glanced at the children filing in, boots clattering across the wooden floor. Most wore patched coats and had hollows under their eyes from the lean winter. She didn't recognize any names yet, but she remembered what it felt like to be new and uncertain. By midday, she'd earned a scraped shin from breaking up a scuffle over a button, and a quiet thank you from a girl with a twisted foot who'd never been called to the blackboard before. When the bell rang again that afternoon, a boy with hair like straw asked if she'd be coming back tomorrow. She said yes and meant it. Outside, the wind had settled. Callum waited beside a stack of lumber near the smithy. Griffin perched on the tailgate of a wagon, swinging his legs. Grace held a biscuit wrapped in cloth, her cheeks flushed from the cold. Griffin helped me stack fence posts, Callum said, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. Didn't lose a single one to the river. Geneva raised a brow. The river. Callum tilted his head, faint amusement in his eyes. Just the idea of one. He likes a story. She stepped closer and reached for Grace's hand. And Grace. She's better at hay bales than both of us, Callum said. Told me I was doing it wrong. Geneva looked up at him. You let her. She was right. That night, after the children had gone quiet on their cots, Geneva stepped out back where the moon hung low over the ridge. The air held the scent of snow not fallen yet, and the grass crunched beneath her boots. Callum sat on the porch rail, sleeves rolled back, one leg hooked over the beam. His coat was folded beside him. You've got chalk on your cheek, he said, nodding toward her face. She wiped it with her sleeve, then crossed her arms. I spoke too fast. One boy told me I talk like a preacher's book. You do have a way with words, he said, but they'll get used to it. They already are, she said, and her voice caught on the edge of it. There's a girl named Ruth. She's left-handed. The last teacher beat her for it. Callum's jaw worked. That still happens? Not anymore. He nodded once, slow. You'll be good for them. She moved to the rail beside him. You're quiet when you talk about the past. I've buried most of it, he said. Might be it's safer that way. She looked at his profile in the moonlight. You ever think about starting again? He didn't answer right away. Then he turned toward her, and his voice was low. You're the first person who's made me want to. She leaned against the post, breath shallow. It scares me, wanting something again. Me too. She rested her hand on the rail, inches from his. He looked at it, then slowly reached out and placed his fingers over hers. No hesitation now. No flinch. I think about what kind of life we could build here, he said. Real work. Real days. You, me, two children who don't forget how to laugh. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't want to be alone anymore. You're not, he said, and his thumb brushed the back of her hand, slow and steady. She turned to him then, closer than before, eyes shining in the dim light. He touched her cheek with the barest edge of his fingers, the ones that remained. She leaned into it. He kissed her once, soft and sure, like he'd been waiting all his life for that one moment. When they parted, she didn't look away. I'm not going anywhere, he said, voice rough with truth. I know, she said. Neither am I. Behind them, the wind shifted again, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. Inside, the children stirred but did not wake. And outside, beneath the Wyoming moon, Callum and Geneva stood close, hands still joined, the silence between them full of promise not yet spoken but already true. The spring thaw came slow to Red Rock, creeping in through wet soil and the steady drip of snowmelt off the eaves. By mid-March, the roads turned to ruts deep enough to catch a wagon wheel, and the smell of damp hay settled thick over the pastures. Callum stood knee-deep in mud behind Eli's barn, hoisting a stubborn fence post back into place. Beside him, Griffin held the hammer with both hands, swinging like it weighed twice what he did. Try the side, not the top, Callum said without looking. You'll split it clean if you keep at it like that. Griffin shifted his stance and struck again, this time with a cleaner hit. That's better, Callum said. Now once more. The boy grinned, missing both front teeth, and swung again. They finished near dusk, Callum wiping his brow with the back of his arm, Griffin dragging the empty water bucket beside him. When they reached the edge of the bunkhouse, Geneva was already there, rolling pastry dough on the washstand with her sleeves pushed above her elbows. That for supper or the preacher's visit? Callum asked, leaning against the doorframe. She didn't look up. Both. He's coming to ask about the school fund again. Says the board's short and the roof's leaking. That's so? She dusted flour from her hands and finally met his eyes. I told him I'd help raise what's needed. Bake sale after Sunday service. Callum stepped closer, lowering his voice. You don't need to carry the whole town on your shoulders. I'm not, she said. Only the part one care about. He watched the way she moved, precise but unhurried. Her hands steady even after a full day of lessons and tending to Grace's cough. He hadn't realized how much space she filled until she was in it, how the rooms felt warmer, the hours easier. I was thinking, she said, pausing to press the dough flat with her palm, about planting a garden behind the schoolhouse. Carrots, maybe, or sorrel. Something the children can tend. You'll need a fence, he said, and someone to haul the soil. She smiled without turning. I know a man. He reached over and brushed a bit of flour from her jaw with his thumb. She caught his wrist gently, holding it there a moment. You ever miss what you left behind? She asked. He shook his head. Wasn't anything worth keeping. What about your mother? Your people? Callum's hand lowered. My ma died when I was young. My father raised cattle and drank too much. I left before I turned 20. Haven't seen a blood relation since. Geneva's brow softened. Do you ever want to? I've got what I need now, he said, and glanced toward the window, where Grace sat by the stove, drawing lines in the fogged glass with one finger. Geneva followed his gaze. She asked if you were her uncle this morning. What did you tell her? I said no, but that you're something better. He looked back at her, caught off guard. Better? She nodded. You stayed. The silence between them settled deep. Not heavy, just full. Outside, the last light slipped behind the hills, turning the snow patches a pale pink. Inside, Griffin tugged on Callum's pant leg and pointed to a splinter in his palm. Callum crouched down, pulled it free with a steady hand, then ruffled the boy's hair. That night, after the children were asleep, Geneva sat on the edge of the cot, her hands folded in her lap. Callum stood by the door, watching her in the dim lamplight. I keep thinking, she said, about how fast things changed. 1 week I was kneeling in ash, trying to keep them breathing. Now I'm teaching arithmetic and baking pies. You built it, he said. I kept waiting for it to fall apart. It won't, he said. Not while I'm here. She stood and closed the space between them. I believe you. He didn't move when she slipped her arms around his waist, her cheek resting against his chest. He held her carefully, as if afraid he'd wake from it. I don't want to sleep alone anymore, she said softly. You won't, he said. Not again. Later, when the fire was low and the wind quiet, Geneva lay beside Callum on the narrow cot, her head tucked beneath his chin, his arm wrapped around her back. Her breathing slowed, matched his. The room held no noise but the soft rustle of quilts and the faint crack of settling wood. He stared at the ceiling, the weight of her against him, something he never thought he'd deserve again. And still she stayed. By late April, the last of the frost had lifted from the valley, leaving the earth sponge soft and ready. Geneva stood behind the schoolhouse, sleeves rolled to her elbows, a trowel in one hand, and a shallow trench dug for carrot seed at her feet. The morning had begun cool, but the sun had since climbed high over the pines, warming the backs of her hands and the nape of her neck. Callum stepped through the gate carrying a lard tin filled with water, boots caked with red clay. He set it down beside her and leaned on the shovel he'd brought from Eli's shed. Mrs. Branning said the roof held through last night's storm, he said. No leak over the reading desk. Geneva brushed soil from her palm. The children can sit without their slates getting wet now. That's a thing worth having. He crouched beside her, resting his arms on his knees. You still thinking of painting the inside? I've been saving eggshells for whitewash, she said. Once the fence is done, I'll start. Callum studied the neat rows she'd marked with twine. You always this thorough? I like when things grow where they're meant to. She glanced over her shoulder toward the school. where Grace sat on the porch steps with a book open on her lap, lips moving silently over each word. Griffin chased a beetle near the fence post, his laughter carrying across the yard. "They aren't afraid anymore," Geneva said. "That's the first thing I notice in the morning. No fear in their eyes." Callum followed her gaze. "You gave them that." She turned back to the earth. "We did." He stood, offering her his hand. "Come on. There's something I want to show you." She dusted her skirt and followed him around the edge of the schoolhouse, past the back trail that led toward the ridge. They walked in silence until they crested a low hill, where the tall grass parted to reveal a small cabin, half-built. The frame stood solid, roof not yet shingled, but the porch posts were in place and a chimney rose from the far end, stones stacked with care. Geneva stopped. "When did you?" "I started after the first frost broke," Callum said, voice low. "Eli helped with the stonework. I figured if I wanted to build a life, I ought to start with a home." She stepped forward, fingers brushing the edge of the doorframe. "You built this for us?" "For you," he said, "and the children. And me, if you'll have me." She turned, eyes searching his face. "I've never asked anyone for anything," he said. "But I want this. I want you. I want to wake up to your voice and fall asleep beside you with the children under this roof. Safe." Geneva looked back at the cabin. The wind stirred the hem of her dress, carrying the scent of wild sage and damp earth. Her hand trembled as she reached for his. "You already have me," she said. He stepped forward and cupped her face between his hands, his touch reverent. She leaned into him, eyes full. "I love you," she whispered. Callum's breath caught. "You don't have to say it," he said. "I wanted to." He kissed her there, in the half-finished doorway of the home they would finish together. It was not hurried, not uncertain. It was the kind of kiss that settled deep and stayed. They returned to town hand in hand, quiet but sure, the path behind them soft with new green. 2 weeks later, Geneva stood at the front of the church, her dress pale blue, simple but carefully stitched. Grace held a bundle of early wildflowers gathered from the edge of the schoolyard. Griffin stood beside Callum, chin held high, boots newly polished. The preacher's voice was warm, the vows plain-spoken. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Callum didn't wait. He took Geneva's hands in his, kissed her like the rest of the room had fallen away. Afterward, Mrs. Branning brought out a pie she'd saved for the occasion, and the children danced barefoot in the grass outside the church. Eli passed around coffee brewed strong, and someone played fiddle until the sun dipped low. As the sky turned amber, Geneva sat beneath the cottonwood tree beside the church, her head resting on Callum's shoulder. "We don't owe anyone for this," she said. "No," he answered. "It's ours." The cabin was finished before the summer heat came. Geneva planted herbs in the window boxes, and Grace helped her hang muslin curtains sewn from scraps. Griffin carved initials into the porch rail, his and Grace's and Callum's and Geneva's, all side by side. Callum took work managing Eli's southern grazing land, riding out at dawn and returning by supper. Geneva taught until the schoolhouse emptied for summer, then filled the days with canning, mending, and long walks with the children through the tall prairie grass. They never spoke of the fire again. It lived behind them, unforgotten but no longer reaching forward. The children grew without the shadow of fear, and Geneva learned to laugh without apology. One night, as thunder rolled far off in the hills, Geneva stood barefoot on the porch, watching lightning flicker along the horizon. Callum stepped behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. "You still glad you stayed?" he asked. She turned in his arms, pressed her lips to his chest. Every moment. He kissed the top of her head and held her while the storm passed. And in the years that followed, the cabin settled into the land like it had always been there. The garden flourished, the schoolhouse remained strong, and the love that had grown slow and steady between them never once dimmed. They built a life not from what had been lost, but from everything they chose to keep. And they kept each other. Always.